Hi, and welcome to this tutorial on Whois History from Domain Tools. Whois History is a powerful investigative tool that lets you look back in time to spot significant changes in the history of a domain, ownership, registration, that kind of thing. It is one of the premium tools available to Domain Tools professional and enterprise members, and it is often the first stop after Whois itself in an investigation of a domain. There are several big changes from our previous Whois history, and to illustrate them, I'm going to conduct a Whois history exploration, narrating the steps along the way. The first thing you will notice about the new Whois history is the very different layout from the previous version. As you'll see, no functionality is lost. In fact, we've even added some important new features. The new Whois history page is laid out in three main sections: the lookup and filter controls, the timeline, and the Whois record display. Let's look at a domain and see how these controls work, starting with the lookup and filter controls. The example I'm using here is a company called FireEye.com. The lookup box works as before. It's where you begin your exploration of a domain's history. If you got to this page from the main Whois page, then the search box is pre-populated with that domain. Pretty straightforward. We're going to look at filtering a little later. To get things started, let's look at the history of FireEye.com. You can see that Domain Tools has 140 historical Whois records for FireEye.com. The timeline highlights changes in the Whois records and lets you navigate forward and backward in the history of the domain. The date in the timeline is the date of the most recent record in a group of identical Whois records. You can click More to expose the duplicate records between the dates shown in the timeline. If there are no records in the database between those dates, the More link is grayed out. Let's look at an example. Here we have two dates a few months apart. If I click More here on the November 4th entry, I'll see a list of Whois records, all of which are identical. The date shown here was the most recent date before a change occurred. So in this example, we know something changed between July 12th and November 4th. Let's find out what it was that changed. Seeing what changed from one record to the next is among the most important functions of Whois history. Click Changes to see what changed on a given record. This opens a display of the before and after Whois records. There are three view options to choose from: side by side with the changes highlighted, in line with the changes shown stacked on top of one another, and Whois records simply shows the raw Whois records side by side. Choose the view you prefer. You can use the right and left keyboard arrows or click the arrows with your mouse at the right and left margins of the display to jump from one pair of records to the next pair of changed records. So it doesn't step chronologically through the records, it jumps from one change to the next. This can help you quickly find a specific type of change. Sometimes it's very important to spot records where there was no Whois privacy in place. This can be one of the most important ways to discover more about who is or was behind a domain. This symbol shows which records had Whois privacy in effect. Another new feature in Whois history is screenshots. The screenshot link displays a screenshot of the main page of the domain if a website was active for the domain on that date and if the screenshot exists in the Domain Tools database. If Screenshots is grayed out, try clicking More, and you may see a screenshot in one of the identical Whois records. Here's an example. If you mouse over the screenshot link, you'll see the screenshot, and you can also click it to open the screenshot in a different tab. Now sometimes you may need to find a Whois record for a specific date. If you need to see the Whois record for a particular date, go to the next date in the timeline above the date you're seeking and click More. So for example, let's say that I'm looking for a record on August 2nd, 2013. I go to the next date above that, which is November 4th, and I click More, and now I have a record for August 2nd. If we don't have a record in the database on that particular date, you can choose the one nearest to it before or after for your purposes. I mentioned filtering earlier. Filtering is an important new function in the new Whois history tool. There are lots of different things you might want to filter on. Person or organization names, street addresses, email addresses, and phone numbers are common examples. Let's see it in action. Say that I know or suspect that this domain once belonged to someone else. In our example, it was a news service for firefighters. Let's put that in the filter and have a look. I'm going to type firemen and hit the filter button. Here we have the filtered list, or in this case, it's not really a list, it's just one record. This can help you move one step forward in your investigation. And in the example, sure enough, there's our search string firemen in the Whois record. Clear the filter to return to the entire body of historical Whois records. Now let's look at the Whois record itself. One of the handy things about this layout is that you can move up and down the timeline, and you always have the Whois record for the date you selected right in front of you. By default, we show the most recent record. These links let you move forward and backward in time to the next changed record, just like we saw earlier in the Changes view. Remember, if you need to move chronologically from one record to the next, even if they're identical, you can always use the More control in the timeline to see all of those identical records. Very often, an investigation will proceed from one known piece of information to another. From the Whois record, you can initiate other searches to advance your investigation. The name of the domain here takes you to the main Domain Tools Whois page for that domain. The email address buttons launch a reverse Whois query for that address, so you can see other domains that have that address associated with them. A lot of the power of domain tools lies in the ability to pivot from one piece of information to another, to identify connections among domains, individuals, organizations, IP addresses, and other data points. Our last couple of controls to look at are up in the upper right part of the Whois record. Use the Download control to download the displayed record as a text file. If you need to download all the records in a single PDF document, you can do that too. Take a look at Domain Tools Domain Report. This control is for permalink. Use the permalink control if you'd like to send or link or bookmark the full URL of the page, including the context of the displayed Whois record. For example, if you click on a Whois record from this particular date, January 3rd of 2014, and then you click the permalink control, when you send that URL or bookmark it, it will always show that particular Whois record, January 3rd, 2014. If you don't use the permalink control and you copy or bookmark the URL, it will simply take you to the latest Whois record that we have on file for the domain. In this tutorial, we saw how Whois history can help you explore the history of a domain as reflected in its Whois records. By navigating the timeline, you can spot where things changed, and by looking at the Whois records on those dates, you can see what changed, and you can use that information to move an investigation forward. You can use the new filtering control to narrow your search or find Whois records that contain a particular string. Whois history is one of the premium tools available to our enterprise and professional members. If you haven't done so already, come try it out. If you're not already a member, set up a free trial, and you can explore this powerful tool for 7 days. Thanks for joining us, and happy exploring!